don't think spirits are evil. Not like a lot of people seem to think. I'm not here to tell you some ridiculous story about scary ghosts or things that keep kids up at night. I want to help. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm making any sense. It doesn't make much sense to me either. There was this car crash. Lewis, my brother, was behind the wheel. He was driving his friends back from a party, and I know what you're thinking, because at first the police thought it too, but he hadn't been drinking. He was their designated driver, and I know my brother wouldn't be driving if it wasn't safe. He was never that stupid. Overly cautious, in fact. Guess that's what made it so much worse. He dropped everyone else off home by the time it had happened, except his girlfriend. He was hit by a lorry. It went into the side of him by a roundabout in the middle of our village. The driver didn't look properly and just went. Our little village isn't big, so the roads are empty at that time of night. I don't really remember finding out. I must have blacked it out, repressed it, or whatever fancy word you want to give it. I was so numb to it all. Like, those first few days were the same day blending into one, and I just stayed in bed. I remember screaming, Mum, when she found out. I remember she just like crumbled, folded in on herself when they had told her. When the police came by, it completely broke her. She was silent for weeks after, barely ate, barely slept. Dad tried to keep it all together, like keep us going and be the strong one, but he was grieving too in his own way. I never fully saw it, but I knew he was. I'd catch him out in the garden just staring up at Lewis's bedroom window, or he'd go for walks and be gone for hours. See, Lewis was the favourite. Not so much that Mum and Dad would ever give him more than me, but he was the golden child who had everything going for him and just had this way about him, like this infectious personality that you couldn't help but get drawn into. Clever, sporty. He was lazy too, but he was the pride of the family. And he always looked after me. He'd keep an eye on me at school. Took me for my first drink when I turned 18. And my first drink when I was 14. I suppose I just sort of retreated into myself when it happened. I wouldn't talk to anyone. I let things slip by. School, jobs, friends. They all just felt like nothing. Didn't see the point. Not when things could be over in the next second. Why bother working for an end or a life I might never see? I gave up. Drifted around the house, and that was that. I didn't even cry until after the funeral. Lucy came over. He was Lewis's girlfriend. She came over a few days after it happened, brought us flowers. You could see she'd been crying non-stop. That's how red her eyes were. She gave some false promise about coming over soon, but we haven't seen her since. We probably scared her. Mum shouting upstairs, me and Dad staring like zombies. I guess what I'm trying to say is that for 6 months after Lewis's death, our house was hell. Like I said, we live in a small village. Stories, news, it spreads fast. Like when the police came round the night it happened, everyone on our street came out to see. All stood on their doorsteps looking at our little house packed in the middle. So we got a steady stream of well wishes and niceties. People saying sorry for your loss, or sorry to hear about Lewis, here's a plate of cream eggs and a sandwich. I don't mean to sound ungrateful. That's not what I'm trying to say, but I don't know, it's like you get to the point where you just hate hearing it. Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. What are they talking about? What did they do? just hearing it over and over again, making it sound like they were driving that lorry. It's stupid, but your brain works against you in times like that. Eventually we put a sign up basically saying thanks but no thanks. We didn't need the daily reminders. We all wished he was back. I don't think any of us expected that wish would come true. The silence started to, I guess, eat away at us. In silence you can think, you can remember, you reflect. Dad decided to fill it any way he could. He'd put on the radio, any station he could find, and left it on all day. He started playing Naive by the Cooks. That song used to play so loud in his room. I knew all the words, even though I've never actually chosen to listen to it myself. I mean, it's not a song that is typically played on the radio now, really, is it? But when I heard it playing, I almost forgot he was gone. Like I could hear him in his room. It's playing, and just as the chorus hits, the song cuts out. Very briefly, like barely even noticeable, but it definitely stopped. We didn't suddenly think, oh, Lewis is back, because I mean, that's mental. There's wishful thinking and there's reading far into things. But then it kept happening. Dad thought the radio was broken. He kept turning it off and on again, fiddling with the dials, pressing all the buttons. Spent a couple of days in the garage trying to fix it up. I think it made him closer to Lewis, like he was making the song he loved play on the radio properly again, and to be focused on something else for a while. He hadn't had anything else to think about but Lewis for months. The radio fixed, didn't last long, and a few days later it started stopping and starting again. Mum noticed the pattern first. It only seemed to mess up during certain songs that were in some sense related to Lewis, songs he would blast in his room. You Raise Me Up, which he sang at a family barbecue when we were kids and never lived down. It Must Have Been Love, that he played after his first breakup, things like that. Mum just took it as a sign, straight away. She was convinced that it was Lewis from beyond the grave trying to communicate with us. Dad thought she was raving mad. I wanted to believe it. I really wanted him to be back with us in any form, but it just seemed ridiculous. Something you clutch onto for dear hope instead of just accepting that they're gone. My brother somehow sending us signals from beyond. Mum started playing the radio whenever she could, just in case he would send her a message. I started to believe it was him when the radio began by itself. The first night it happened, it was so loud. It woke us all up. It was Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Mum used to sing it all the time to us, and we would watch The Wizard of Oz every Christmas. It would play every night at exactly 2:23 a.m, the time Lewis was pronounced dead. Mum and I were convinced it couldn't be anything else. He was trying to talk to us. I actually began to look forward to being woken up by this song. I'd always say hello to Lewis, told him I'm still thinking of him, and went back to sleep. At times it felt as though it was a dream, like when I'd woke up I'd been dreaming the whole thing. I didn't want to feel like that, so I ended up staying up for longer. I'd actually have a conversation with him, sort of like I tell him that Mrs. Christie said my chemistry was getting back on track, or that Mum started singing in the kitchen again. And every so often a little snippet of Somewhere Over the Rainbow would play, as if he was telling me he was proud of me. That's how I told him Dad left. I guess Mum and I were floating so high on Lewis being home, we never realised how quiet and how much of a toll it was taking on him. He went and stayed with my grandparents. That night I told Lewis how he'd just got up and walked away. I suppose he knew I needed him, because he didn't play Somewhere Over the Rainbow. He said I heard a voice. It wasn't him, it was more like a radio host, but different radio hosts flicking between signals as if Lewis was editing them together. It was quite difficult to make out, to be honest with you. But I heard Mum, Blue, home. I don't know what the blue was about, but clearly he was listening and taking it all in. From that night on, the voices would keep happening. Not every night, mind you, but some nights. Some messages would make more sense than others. Things like table, shatter, cork. I had no idea what he meant. Well, recently it became a bit clearer. Like the other day, Mum and I were sitting having dinner when out of nowhere her wine glass broke. Seemed to just completely smash all over the dining table. Both just stared, terrified to touch our food in case they'd suddenly got into our food somehow. We didn't attribute it to anything, just tidied it up, went about our lives. I mean, Lewis hadn't done anything like that before, so we had no reason to believe it was him. A few days later, it happened again. Not the glass smashing, but the light in Lewis's room turned on. It was amazing. It was like he was there, in the house with us. I hadn't been in his room since the crash, but I went in to see. The light kept flickering, telling me he was there. One of his drawers was open, so I had a look. There was nothing major in there, some stationery books from school, a book he'd been reading, things like that. I had to have a proper look to see if there was anything out of the ordinary, but there wasn't. I closed the door to just feel the silence of it, to try and reach out to him or just imagine him there. I don't know why I did it. It's the first time I'd been in there and really felt like he was gone. That he wouldn't walk back through the door and make everything okay again. I had a little walk around, went past the mirror and I caught my reflection and I could see him. Lewis staring back at me in the mirror just over my shoulder. My heart stopped, like it fell out of my body and I was just empty. The only part of me I could feel were my eyes, like they were stuck open and I couldn't look away. Eventually I turned around to see if he really was standing behind me. It was stupid, I know, but he wasn't there, and when I turned back he wasn't in the mirror either, if he had been there at all. When he stood in the mirror he looked so sad and so hollow. I can't explain it, but it was like he was begging me to let him go. He didn't say anything, at least not that I could hear, but I could feel him. I could, sense it. I got out of his room pretty quickly after that, but his light kept flickering. I kept trying to talk on the radio, but I stopped replying. I don't know what all this communication with him meant, but it seemed to be making him stronger, like he started being there more often. His voice was coming through the radio, not the voices of radio hosts anymore. He started talking in the daytime too, not just at night. I tried to explain it to Mum, but she wouldn't listen. Talking to him being there, it was the only thing that could make her happy. The only thing that could bring her out of the darkness we'd all been stuck in for the first months he'd be gone. She kept trying to talk to him, but more things started happening. Plates would start smashing in our hands, giving us cuts. The radio would play as loud as it could with no let up all night. The mirror in Lewis's room fell and smashed, breaking into 1,000,000 glass shards. And then yesterday, Mum had been out to the shops picking up a few things. So rare that she goes out anymore, but when she came back, she was walking by the car and she just lifted up and started floating. I only saw because I heard her car pull in, but she was floating, literally lifted off her feet into the air above her car. Then it was as if she'd been thrown through the front window. She went straight into the window and into the house. I screamed when I saw it. Luckily, she only had a few cuts and bruises somehow. I think there's still a part of him left that won't hurt us. That's why Mum was okay. How else can you explain going through a window with next to no injuries? I don't know what he wants, but he is getting angrier. I don't know how to, but I need to let him move on. I think us keeping him here, talking to him, calling out to him, it's holding him here with us. He's dead. He shouldn't be here. We're trapping him. I think it's changing him, corrupting him. I know how it sounds because I would have thought I was mad too before all of this. I just hope he can pass on soon before he causes any more damage, or worse, before anyone else gets hurt.